I've seen quite a few times, so I'm interested in that. Regarding like countries in Scandinavia, like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, they have been taking in quite a few like refugees and immigrants over the past couple of years. But Sweden, in particular, has been taking in a lot of immigrants and refugees. And I don't know if you can answer this, but like, why do you think Sweden is taking in more immigrants than like Norway and Denmark? Like the other two countries, like the latter two, they've like tried to cap it because they don't want to like disrupt their population, whatever. But Sweden continues to take it in, even though there's a lot of people on the right side, a lot of nationalists, not even nationalists, just people in general just don't want to take any more immigrants. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time in Sweden for this book and for some years, and as in the rest of Scandinavia, and there's a very, very interesting set of reasons. The specific reasons for why Sweden has been the only country other than Germany to take in this percentage of refugees is all sorts of things, but one I think is the self-image of the country. I thought when I first started going to Sweden that Sweden didn't suffer as much from the guilt thing as the rest of Europe, and then I realized it's a very subtle form of it that actually has been growing since you go away from the war, as Swedes have become more aware of what they didn't do and what they did, which I think they're going through a very interesting rethinking of what actually happened in those years that they don't feel good about. And that's one reason why they carry the guilt. As for the comparison with the other countries nearby, it's a fascinating question. I have one main thought on it. Denmark is one of the countries that got what I describe as an early warning siren going off. Because in 2005, when one very small Danish paper ran a set of cartoons of Mohammed, the whole world went nuts, and embassies were burned, and none was killed in Africa, and there was, demonstrations on the streets of London with people waving placards outside the embassy saying, "Behead the people who offend Islam." It went all around the world, and the Danish government at the time, I think, learnt a lot from it, and I think that the Danish people learnt a lot from it. And I once spoke to a Danish politician some years ago, but some years after the crisis, the cartoon crisis. I always say you've got to say the cartoon crisis with a straight face. It's talks about the mad, strange era we're in. But I spoke to a Danish politician who said to me, "I don't want any more immigrants in the country now." And I said to them, "Well, that seems an excessively bald cut-off." And they said to me, "Look, we've done polling on it, and the polls all show that 90% of Muslims in Denmark think that the Danish papers don't have the right to publish cartoons of Muhammad or ever blaspheme Islam." This MP said to me, "Look, I don't want to do it, because for every 10 people we bring in, 9 of them will stifle our right to free speech more, and so we don't want it." And I thought that, look, you can agree or disagree with that, but it's a plausible viewpoint. I think that Denmark, for that reason, saw what was happening in 2015 and dodged the whole thing. And it dodged it, by the way, in a very interesting and unpleasant way. At one point during this book, I spoke to a French official, and I said, "How come you dodged a lot of the 2015 thing?" And this French official said to me, "There's some advantages to being regarded as a racist country." And that's a very interesting response. Now, Denmark went out of its way to look unwelcoming when they did this thing that they've done very few times, actually, as far as I understand, but announced that migrants coming across its border could have their valuables to the value that they might take from the state in welfare have taken away from them at the border. There was a huge hue and cry across Europe and across the world. People made Holocaust comparisons, I think unjustified, but they made all sorts of historical comparisons. My God, you're taking refugees, jewelry off them and so on. Actually, I think very little of this happened. What it did do was it sent this very strong and ugly message around the world. Denmark doesn't want you. Don't come here. So that's what happens when you have a crisis of leadership and you have a crisis of things happening, and people all have to come up with a way to deal with it. And some of them do it well, and a lot of them just make it up as they go along.
Leland O'Raggy, the Swedish political establishment was outraged by Mr. Trump's remarks, pointing to a migrant riot that hadn't taken place. And then a few nights later, serious riots did break out in a largely migrant suburb of Stockholm. So he wasn't far out, was he?
Oh, I think he was far out because he's misleading the public with how he uses the statistics. I think it's important to remember that the violence has decreased in Sweden for the past 20 years, and research shows that there is no evidence that indicate that immigration leads to crime, and so I think he's far out. And the social unrest in these different areas is not because of the ethnical backgrounds of these people living there, but more about socioeconomic reasons.
Okay, no evidence that migrants are responsible for any kind of crime wave.
Well, the problem about this story, if I can say so, it reminds me of what happened after the Charlie Hebdo and other terror attacks at the Jewish supermarket in Paris a couple of years ago, when, if you remember, also a Fox News commentator said something that was sort of outlandish about Paris, and the mayor of Paris threatened to sue Fox News, saying, you know, you're making our city look bad. It's a bit like that. We're sort of...
Why?
Because the truth on this lies between Donald Trump and the Swedish authorities on this. The Swedish government is very reluctant to admit to any downsides of its own migration policy, and particularly the migration it had in 2015. But there are very obvious, huge downsides, because Sweden, among other things, is not a country which needs an unskilled labour force, which doesn't speak Swedish.
What was raised is the matter of evidence. What is the evidence?
Well, first of all, if I can say so, the rape statistics in Sweden that have been cited are familiar with the rape statistics across other countries that have seen similar forms of migration. Danish authorities and the Norwegian authorities have recorded similar things, which is a very large...
They're not broken down by ethnicity, so we don't know.
This is part. This is part of the problem.
Well, get Leila Naragi to respond to that.
It's again a lot of lies and rumors going about. When it's about, for example, rape that was raised here, it's difficult to compare the statistics, because in Sweden, for example, many crimes that in other countries are labeled as bodily harm or assault are in Sweden actually labeled as rape. Also how you count it, because if a woman goes to the police and report that her husband or boyfriend has raped her every night for 1 year, in Sweden that is counted as 365 offenses, while in many other countries it's counted as one.
You know, we can argue on the statistics, but something's going wrong. I mean, I look at the recent news from Sweden. 6 Afghan child refugees committed suicide in the last 6 months. Unemployment among recent migrants now 5 times higher than it is among non-migrants. 5 times higher. We've seen gang violence in Malmö, where a British child was killed by a grenade. Rioting in Stockholm. The police in Sweden say there are now 53 areas of the country where it is now dangerous to patrol. Something's going wrong.
Let me get back to what I think is the core at this debate, if I may, and that is the right for people that are fleeing war and political persecution to seek asylum. That is a human right. And we in Sweden, we are not naive. We don't think that we can do everything. But we want to live up to our obligation, as every country has an obligation to receive asylum seekers.
But the thing is that you've changed your policy on that, haven't you? Because having taken in 163,000 people in 1 year alone, you then closed your borders, I think very wisely. You closed the border, which was open, which meant that 10,000 people a day at one point were walking from Denmark into Malmö. You rightly changed that. So you've realized that whatever one's aspirations as a country in terms of asylum, it sometimes meets reality. And Sweden is now meeting the reality of this. And if I can just add...
let's respond to that, then I'll come back to you.
We are not naive. We know that we cannot do everything, but we want to try to do our share, as we think that other countries also need to do their share. But also let me say that if you look what World Economic Forum is saying about our country, they show that we are on the top of many rankings, the best country to live in, the best country to age in, the best country to have children in, the best country to start enterprising.
So why have you not been so good then, given all these numbers that you brought in integrating the refugees as they've come in? I'll just come back to the unemployment rate, 5 times higher among migrants than among non-migrants, and that is the highest ratio of any country in the EU and the OECD. Why have you not been able to integrate the people that you brought in for humanitarian reasons?
I'm sure that there are things that we can do much better, of course. But if you look, for example, at the immigration that came in the 90s from the Balkans, they are very well integrated. They are contributing to our society. They are starting enterprises. They are working in different fields of society, and they really helped our country.
Why have they not got jobs?
But they have got jobs. If you look at the
No, I'm talking about the migrants who came
But it takes time. It takes time with integration and establishment. And if we look at experience from the 90s, we managed it, and I'm sure we can do it again.
Can I just try to put this into some context, Douglas Maria? It is clear that Sweden has got problems as a result of the number of migrants that come in. Whether as bad as Mr. Trump or others make out is another matter. But perhaps I could just put it into a bit of context. Malmo, which has been at the epicenter of many of these migrant problems, its homicide rate is 3 per 100,000. Chicago, 28 per 100,000.
Sure.
It may have problems, but they're not huge.
No, they are pretty huge, and I think they'll grow. I mean, first of all, the Balkan refugees into Sweden in the 90s actually did bring a lot of problems with them. Sweden did, for the first time, see serious ethnic gang rivalries, as you know. There was an upsurge in gang-related violence that's gone on since. I would also add this: the situation in Malmo, in particular, it is exaggerated by some people. There's no doubt about that. I've been there many times. It's undoubtedly exaggerated by some. It's also vastly understated by the Swedish authorities. I come back to this issue, if I may. Take just before this recent influx. In 2010, 1 in 10 Jews in Malmo, of the remaining Jewish populations, registered some form of attack on them. It got so bad in 2010 that non-Jews in Malmo volunteered to escort Jewish people to services in Malmo because of the upsurge in anti-Semitism.